extent. In addition, all of the kids will get individual case management services. So if we see a kid needs mental health services and maybe it hasn't been identified earlier, we will actually communicate that to the PO, but we'll seek out the referral source. And then the really wonderful thing about collaboration with other nonprofits is that, you know, for instance, we already had certain programs that youth could benefit from, just like the Cultural Wellness Center did and the YWCA. And each of those organizations now becomes a conduit for providing a continuum of services for those youth.
If I may, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Gary, you said something in framing a question that I want to, because I have a different impression of it. You said tweaking. This is not system tweaking. This is system change. It is not just taking a piece here and a piece there and trying to do better with it. The initiative gets involved with the system and through their work creates just a cultural change in their policies and practices to have better outcomes for kids. And to protect the public while doing that. So it's not that when I heard the word tweak, and sometimes people say that, well, it's a project. It's this. It's really a systemic change in the way we have done business with juveniles in the county. So I just, I didn't mean to.
I just want to add one more thing about the alternatives. And I think, one, we're so appreciative that the county has stepped up and actually helped provide funding for their alternatives. But I also think that there was a lot of informal networks in the community that probation officers are beginning to rely on and seeking out, knowing that detention shouldn't be a last alternative. I know I've heard Russell speak many times about, experiences he's had and when the community came together and made their own solutions. And I think the probation officers are actually looking for more of those organic solutions and trying to use detention really as a last resort.
I think everyone on the panel would remember the time as kids, if you did something, you broke out a street light or you threw a rock through a window, you probably had to face that neighbor with your dad or your mother kind of pushing you by the scruff of your neck saying, we're going to go over and you're going to apologize. And whatever they tell you to do, you're going to do it. Now we have a whole different circumstance out there. You may not know your neighbors may be afraid of you. All sorts of things come up where now you expect to be able to call the police officer and say, take care of my problem, where before it was taken care of locally. I'm not going to go there. Russell, you're a community person. You're a father, a grandfather. You work in the criminal justice system. What do you see with JDAI from your perspective? Because you've been involved almost from day one.
Well, I see it I think I've said before that when I heard about JDAI, I was right at a point where I was feeling fairly hopeless about what was happening with our youth, particularly our youth of color. And a lot of it right here in the St. Paul, Minneapolis areas where I grew up, and it was totally different than what I knew it to be. So when I heard about JDAI, I became very hopeful because it sounded exactly like what we needed.
You've told a couple times your story in different forums, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to talk about that or save it for later?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Right before I heard about the juvenile.
Because I'm asking you this because I think a lot of people who watch this show may have the same sort of experience. I want them to see it through your eyes, and then as we talk about the program, what changes more than tweaking that we're doing in juvenile corrections in Ramsey County.
Well, I believe that's right, too. Right before I heard about the JDAI, I got a call from my grandson, Russell, his mother, and she said, Dad, Russell's been locked up. And this is my grandson that is the playground kid. You give him a football, a basketball, a baseball, he shows you the game. And I'm particularly very proud of him, as I am with all of them. But I couldn't believe it. So we went down the next day for a hearing, and what we were told is that he'd been on the playground and a kid was taped up, locked up, and put in a bag, and Russell was involved in that. And my heart dropped. And so in the hearing, my grandson said, Yes, I was involved in that. And I was, again, I was shocked. But when the story came out, it turned out that they said, well, who locked up the kid? And he says, well, there were 5 of us. I and my buddies all went to the playground, and we had one of my buddies' a little brother with us. And he was talking head, is the way he put it. He said, so I put the bicycle lock around his waist. And he said, how did he get out of it? He said, well, I'll use the name Tony. He said, Tony's skinny, the lock fell off of him. He said, well, what about the tape? He said, well, I went to talk to some girls, and he's 14 years old. He said, but they wrapped some tape around him. He said, some duct tape. He said, no, some of that tape like you've got on your desk, the Scotch tape. He said, how did he get out of it? He said, well, he just shook his arms and his leg, and it came off. He said, well, what about this bag that you were putting over his head? You know, the bag that you put the basketballs in, the net. You know, we stuck it over his head. We were going to put him on the swing and twirl him around, but he said that made him sick, so we left him alone. And when so-and-so came out from the rec center and said, you boys stop it or we're going to call the police, and they said, well, what did you guys do then? He said, well, we followed him into the rec center because we were still picking the tape off of him. So when the judge heard that, I felt a sigh of relief. I thought everything was, you know, had come to light. And so the next was to come in for the sentencing, which I was curious about. And we came in, and I spoke to the judge, and because he was saying, someone was saying, here's what I suggest that we give him some time for this and this and that. I said, well, how about we just have a circle with all the families involved, since these kids all live in the neighborhood together, and let's just get this all worked out. Well, that was basically dismissed, and my grandson was given 7 to 11 days in
detention,
in the juvenile detention center, which for all of us was it was a blow for him, because he had up to that point believed in the system, and then he turned around, and what I feel happens is that he looked and he saw that his mother and his grandfather basically had no power in the system. I kind of, one of the other things I noticed that on each time that I came, and there were 3 times that I came and spent from late morning through the afternoon just on this case, I noticed that the waiting room were all children of color, with the exception of one white kid who someone came up and whispered something in his ear, and he left. So I it was my opportunity to kind of have juvenile justice 101 through that experience. The day after the sentencing, I came to a meeting about the Juvenile Detentions Alternative Initiative. And the judge involved in the case came in and introduced himself to me and didn't recognize me at all. And I was really shocked by that.
We meet, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Tony.
It is the stories like Russell's and that of his families and their experiences with our juvenile justice system that makes us realize that nobody is saying there shouldn't be a consequence for misbehaviors or for offenses. No one is saying that juveniles should not be held accountable for their misbehaviors or for small or large offenses. I think that we brought in, from the very start when we began the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative in Ramsey County, people from our community, because indeed we wanted to